Ah yes, the legendary SATA SSD. It has been with many of us for over 10 years now. And even though SSDs, especially in the last couple of years, have become even faster with new form factors and interfaces, the standard SATA SSD, even to this day, still happens to be the type of SSD one most likely ends up bringing home. A big reason for that could very well be the fact that such have come down in price significantly. Back in the day, it was considered pure luxury to own a 120 or 128GB SATA SSD. Fast forward to today, and we can get about 500GB for roughly $100 or less. Even capacities up to 2TB are no exception these days. Nonetheless, for that, you still end up having to shell out quite a lot more money than you would for a mechanical hard drive. Also, let me get this straight, there are huge differences in quality and longevity when it comes to SSDs in their respective price ranges. Many tend to ignore that fact, since the performance usually is still pretty damn good most of the time. So today I'll be talking a bit about these differences and what you should look out for at the end of the day when making your choice. A great example will be today's Kingston KC600 with a capacity of 512GB. At the time of this video, this particular drive can be picked up for somewhere in between 85 to 95 US dollars. This appears to be some fair pricing, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to price, performance, and very important to me, longevity or lifespan. So how's a $95 SATA SSD in 2020, and could it actually be worth it spending the extra money and grabbing an NVMe drive instead? Generally speaking, there's not a whole lot new that can be said about solid-state memory these days. It's a worn-out topic, so to speak. I do find it nice of Kingston, however, to back this drive up with a 5-year warranty. And for those of you that might want to breathe some new life into one of your old dinosaur HPCs, no problem. SATA 3 is fully backwards compatible with SATA 2. It's just that you'll be operating at a bandwidth of 3 gigabits per second instead of the 6. Aesthetically, I like the KC600, and the build quality does impress too. The casing, after all, is out of aluminum. It also happens to be the really thin type of 2.5-inch drive, coming in at a thickness of 7mm. The KC600 can be had in capacities ranging from 256GB to all the way up to 2TB. My 512GB model, according to Kingston, should be capable of delivering read and write speeds of up to 550 and 520 megabytes per second respectively. That's more or less the standard speed all across SATA SSDs nowadays. Important for longevity is the drive's TBW value, total bytes written. It's basically an estimate on how often, or rather how much data can be written onto the drive before it dies. So in today's case, just like competing models do, we are talking of about 300 terabytes. The type of NAND memory used plays a big role here. TLC, or rather 3D TLC, is pretty common, but how is it that SSDs with the same capacities with similar speeds can often be had for much less money? Well, we have to differentiate between 3 main types of memory cells for us end consumers: MLC, TLC, and QLC. MLC writes 2 bits to each cell, TLC writes 3 bits, and QLC writes 4 bits. Meaning with the same NAND size, with cheaper QLC cells, more bits can be written to each cell as opposed to TLC or MLC. That sounds great, but it also comes at a great cost, that being the longevity, the durability of the drive. Were you to write big amounts of data to your SSD on a daily basis, I would strongly advise against picking up a QLC-based drive, no matter how attractive the price may seem. That's my opinion. TLC is somewhere in the middle, much more reliable than QLC is, and today's Kingston drive also happens to go with TLC NAND. Now that's it for the theory, but there's more. For that I will have to take a look at the internals of this drive. In my case, I first had to purchase special tools in order to remove these T6H screws used on here. Once it's open, I was surprised on how compact the PCB is. On it we find NAND memory by Micron, and what cannot be missing when talking about good SSDs these days, a DRAM cache buffer. In this case, there's a 512MB LPDDR3 module by Kingston. On the back of the board, I was able to locate the Silicon Motion SM2259 4-channel NAND controller, so all in all this drive is fairly well equipped. But I've probably bored you for long enough now, which is why we'll now take a look at the benchmarks, especially how this drive keeps up with those super fast NVMe SSDs out there. As is not to be expected otherwise, these days the majority of SATA SSDs brings about the same amount of performance to the table, at least when it comes to sequential read and writes. The Kingston KC600 with 512GB seems to be a pretty good choice, although it can no longer really stand out from the sea of SSDs out there. Actually, no drive of this type does nowadays. But it's also a fact that these fast PCI Express NVMe SSDs leave a huge gap behind a SATA SSD. Even Kingston's very own A1000 with PCIe 3.0 X2 bandwidth is so much faster, but Corsair's drive, making use of 4 PCIe 3.0 lanes, appears to be a speed demon when putting things into perspective. However, it also needs to be said that by now there are even faster NVMe drives out there, making use of 4 PCIe 4.0 lanes. While I didn't actually have the chance to test such a drive myself, you can only imagine how much more speed you'd be getting. But the point is, do we actually need this much speed? Because let's be honest, we will not experience the same effect like we did back then when we switched over from mechanical hard drives to SSDs. In most tasks you complete on a daily basis, you hardly will notice any difference in performance between SATA SSDs and super fast NVMe SSDs. Sure, in special use cases where things depend on high data transfer speeds, especially when dealing with large file sizes, an NVMe SSD can be a godsend. In many cases, though, the current state of software we are working with, more often than not, unfortunately happens to be a nasty bottleneck, meaning there's a huge difference between theoretical and practically usable performance. For many of us, a decent SATA SSD at the end of the day still appears to be the wiser and especially more affordable choice to make. Besides, we hardly need to deal with any of these side effects that unfortunately sometimes come with NVMe drives, such as high temperatures and the likes. So we can spend the same money or less for more capacity. But of course, it certainly is an appealing thought to have a super fast SSD in one system, even if you don't necessarily notice any real performance gain in most use cases. Nonetheless, there are some pretty good and affordable NVMe SSDs out there that you can buy. With that being said, today's Kingston KC600 with 512GB certainly can be considered a good all-rounder SSD, which still does an excellent job even in 2020. Thanks to all of you that watched this video to the very end.